Hi, everyone. All right, so I don't have a PowerPoint, so let me make my 3 points now before I forget. One, we have to strive to understand each other. Strive to understand our narratives and our contexts and why we do the things that we do. And second of all, we have to use those tools to understand ourselves. What are our narratives? What are our conflicts? Why do we do the things that we do? And third of all, we have to take ownership for our narratives. We have to transform ourselves and become the greatest, wonderfulest people we can become. Sound good? All right, cool. So here's my story. So I was born 22 years and a day ago. Yesterday was my birthday. I was born in Israel, the middle of 3 children, meaning that I was, of course, the ultimate victim in life. And being born in Israel means that the Arab-Israeli conflict has been virtually inescapable for my whole life. My family's narrative is very fraught with violence. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors, fought in the War of Independence for Israel. My parents grew up through most of the terrible wars in the region, including one that claimed my uncle's life in '73. I personally started getting involved when I was in high school. I had the opportunity to interview Holocaust survivors, and I did this for 3 years. Published some of their stories, and ultimately this culminated in a trip to Poland, where I saw the death camps in the Holocaust, visited Auschwitz, visited Treblinka. One death camp in particular really changed my life. It was in Majdanek, and still very much intact. As an 18-year-old, I was walking through these gas chambers, seeing the claw marks on the walls where people had tried to escape. Walked through the crematoriums where people had been burned alive day and night, except no longer during the day because the locals complained and didn't want ashes to get on their laundry, so only during the night. And a path led up to this giant stone bowl in Majdanek, full of the ashes of 50,000 human beings collected on the day that this camp was liberated. And I stood there in front of these ashes, and I realized that, wow, Israel is really, really important. And this stuff is real. And there are hateful people out there who are going to try to kill you just for who you are. And we need to protect ourselves. And brought my message back home, thought it would be obvious to everyone. Went to an Arab-Israeli dialogue, my first time meeting Arab students, thinking, come on, guys, doesn't it make sense? Like, we suffered, we need to state. But, oh man, all I remember from that dialogue is a room full of very angry Arab students banging on their tables, calling for blood, saying they're going to fight back inch for inch and gain their land. And I was terrified to realize, gosh, there's still people out there who hate me, who are trying to kill me. Swung the other direction. I became a crusader for Israel. I created a pro-Israel advocacy group. I taught Israeli history seminars. And this culminated in a conference that I went to where we learned how to debate. I don't mean connect logical arguments. I mean, we learned how to accuse people of rhetoric. We learned how to corner people in their own arguments. We learned how to drown out anti-Israel speakers. And the last thing I remember is pacing back and forth in the hallway of the hotel in tears after an argument with my roommates who explained to me very calmly that, you're naive. You haven't lost your friend in a suicide bombing, so it's understandable. But the Palestinians, they're monsters. They're not like us. They strap bombs to their kids and they blow up buses. And it's easy to not internalize that when you don't live there. But that's just the truth. There's no one to negotiate with over there. And I was done. I was like, I can't do this anymore. These people are full of hate. It's pro-Israel's full of hate, and anti-Israel's full of hate, and everything's anti and pro. And I just withdrew from it all. And for a few years, I just focused on school, transferred to Berkeley, got straight A's, except for in Dacker's class, which, don't worry about it, but I don't know what it means when your only B in your college career is in a class called Human Emotions, but we don't need to talk about it. I got an email during this time from a friend who said, hey, I went on a trip a few summers ago. It's Palestinians and Jews going to the Balkans, doing group process and a conflict comparison analysis between what happened in Yugoslavia during the 90s and what's happening today in Israel-Palestine. And you learn about conflict transformation, and it changed my life. I thought, what? it's crazy. So met up with her. She told me all about it. Showed me the most beautiful pictures ever. I decided, wow, I'm going to do this, especially because of this. She told me, I separate my life into 3 segments, really. Everything before this program called Abraham's Vision, Abraham's Vision itself, this trip, and everything afterwards. And I was like, man, that'd be such a good outline for a TED Talk. All right. So here we go, part 2. My first questions were the obvious ones, like, all right, so where are the Balkans? What are they? What's going on? So we're supposed to do a comparison between the Balkans and Israel-Palestine, and Israel-Palestine is really complex and nuanced, but it's Jews and Muslims are fighting each other. The Balkans are just insane. It's like Serbs and Croats and Bosniaks and Albanians and Catholics fighting Greek Orthodox, fighting Muslims, fighting Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia, and all split in 3 and many presidents. It's really confusing. And we got there to Serbia, our first stop, and had kind of a honeymoon phase where I met Palestinians for the first time, and we were comparing languages and religions and cultures, and it was like, wow, we look like each other, and we talk like each other, and this is great, and we're going to make peace. And our next stop was in Kosovo, where things started to decline a little bit. It was like, okay, so those are the anti-Israel Jews, and those are the hateful thug-like Palestinians, those are the clueless people who don't know why they're here and know nothing about the conflict, and no one knows me because I went through the suffering of being an Israeli and all this, and I find myself withdrawing so much. At the same time, here we were in Serbia and Kosovo and learning about this conflict and hearing these people's narratives. And it was amazing. You talk to the Serbs, and very wonderful, very hospitable people, very defensive in my experience. They'd ask, hey, where are you from? I say, from America. They're like, oh, don't believe anything you've heard about us. Like, okay. And in their narrative, they were just the ultimate victims. In life, they'd suffered genocide and then bombed by the U.S. and the international community, and in come these Albanians, and they steal this historical homeland. All over there was spray paint. 1392, I believe it was, this historical Battle of Kosovo that was such a central part of their people. Go and talk to the Albanians in Kosovo, and they're the ultimate victims. They've been kicked out of their homes, and 1.5 million people banished and suffering, and they didn't necessarily resort to terrorism. They resorted to the only means they had to defend themselves. And these narratives didn't contradict each other. In fact, they fit each other very well. Each one just required a sort of delegitimization of the other in order to make their own victimhood legitimate. And I could have at that point made this connection of like, wait a second, is that what Israelis and Palestinians are doing? No, we're the ultimate victims. Then we went to Bosnia, and that's where everything really broke down for me. There were 2 videos that we watched. One of them depicting the life of these kids growing up in a refugee camp in Jenin, going through this theater program and growing up and eventually joining militant groups, through suicide attacks, and you see their experiences, and you see their homes being demolished, and you see their kids dying in their arms, and I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to internalize it at all. We watched another video about the occupation, about the facts, statistics, the U.S. money to Israel, and again, I didn't want to hear it. And finally, the breaking point was during a discussion we had, in which the Palestinians brought up Gaza for the first time in the discussion. The war in Gaza had happened a few months back, and we hadn't really talked about it yet. And someone tried to compare it to the Holocaust, and I was like, oh, no way, not even. You don't even know what happened over there. You don't even know what it's like. One of the Palestinians mentioned that his uncle had been killed in the war in Gaza, and I just totally brushed over my head. I was like, no, here are my bullet points. Here's why you guys are wrong. And one of the girls, she said, hold on. Can we stop for a second? He just mentioned that his uncle died a few months ago, and we didn't acknowledge that at all. And my blood just froze. I was like, wait a second, my uncle died, and I've seen just how much despair that's caused for my family, how much that's torn us apart. And that's exactly what this guy's going through. And I totally just dehumanized it. I was thinking about, okay, yeah, but terrorists hide behind civilians, and yeah, it's sort of their fault. We had to defend ourselves. And it's not okay to have rockets launched at your country for 8 years in a row. And I'm so defensive. And I realized that I was terrified to really internalize their narratives and think to myself, I don't know, maybe if I understood it, I'd be justifying it, or I'd be betraying my people. At that point, I started to withdraw again. It was very overwhelming. We went to one more city in Bosnia before the end of the trip, where, before going to Bosnia, I was like, all right, how do all these people live together, right next to each other? And then suddenly, bam, everyone starts killing each other left and right. Like, how does that happen? But it makes sense when you go there and you see the physical divides. It's like, all right, here's the street, like Croats on this side, Bosniaks on this side. Here's the school, like Muslim kids in the morning and Catholic kids in the afternoon. And I mean, you can literally live right next to each other and not have any sort of intimate communication, not even get to know each other, not hear each other's stories. And I realized, okay, that's exactly what things are like in Israel, with people living right there next to each other. It could be the next village over, and you could not know their names, you could not talk to each other. It's exactly what it's like here in so many ways, with the communities that live next to each other. I live in Oakland, next to a lot of other cultures and narratives that I never really get to know, never really communicate with. And that's exactly what it looks like, these physical divides, even in your lunch hall. And with that, the trip was over. So here we go, part 3, after Abraham's vision. 3 points. First of all, you have to understand each other. You have to understand each other's narrative and the context from which you're coming from. I went to Israel after the trip. I was supposed to go back to the US, but sometime in Bosnia, me and the other Israeli in the group decided, we have to buy tickets to Israel. We have to go see it. We have to reconnect with something. Don't know, it was very impulsive. I went back there, and I saw my family, my extended family, who I hadn't seen for a year at that point. And I was pretty horrified by some of the things that they were saying, especially because I'd said a lot of them in the past. Things like, hey, you got to watch out. I've noticed you have Palestinian friends on your Facebook. Like, you might have met some good Palestinians, but they might have friends who are in organizations who track you down and they kill you, and you're putting your family in danger. And before we talk about anything, like, we just have to agree that there's no such thing as Palestinians, and they're just this political tool that's used by Arab leaders to attack Israel, and so much fear and hatred. And I didn't hate them for it. I knew that they weren't monsters because I knew exactly where they were coming from. I knew that it's very possible to be a rational person and arrive to those kinds of conclusions. And then I thought to myself, wow, what if the Palestinians are saying the exact same thing right now about the Jews, talking about us that way, the way that I've been afraid that they might be talking about us? I know chances are they were. And what if they're rational people too? Like, what if they also have some sort of context, some sort of family traumas that get them to this kind of place in life? And then from there, it was a very downward spiral of, oh God, what if everybody is just a human being? And what if everyone's behavior makes sense in their context? Which might seem like common sense until you apply it to things like terrorists, till you apply it to things like my work with the Holocaust. And what if the Nazis weren't just this giant nation of monsters, which is a giant nation of people, subject to very real human pressures, very real systems that we all operate in? All right, second point, have to understand ourselves. It's really hard. It's really, really hard. It's almost easier to understand the others and be like, all right, well, this is their story, this is why they act the way they do. But I had a very strange reaction when I got back from Israel. I withdrew from everything, withdrew from school, started working, actually as a piano teacher, like my mom before me, because if there's one thing I've learned from my psychology degree, it's that you turn into your parents, get over it. I had a physical collapse of sorts. A lot of my romantic life collapsed, and I was such an idiot, and I'm so sorry. And I realized there were so many things going on the inside. My own narrative was controlled by so many factors. My family, which I was afraid to be viewed as a traitor, my friends, my community, my support system, all the stories that I'd been telling myself about where I come from and who I am, all my experiences as a man, as as a suburban, all these things, they added up to who I was. And that leads to the third point, that I don't have to be a slave to that. I could take ownership of that narrative, and I can choose who I want to be. And I did a few things to help me recover from that withdrawal. Took a course on meditation, helped tremendously. Notice I took a deep breath at the beginning of this. It's changed everything. Started biking everywhere, exercising. I thought about all these gender dynamics that I'd seen, particularly in these conflicts in the Balkans, both on the political level, seeing, okay, who are these powerful leaders who are perpetuating so much of this violence? And, how do these dynamics play out in our own group? Who are the people in our discussion groups who would get fiery and take over the discussion and would stomp out of the room? And who are the people who would withdraw and become very quiet? And how did I play into that? So I started a group with some people, a Masculinities Collective, to start challenging these things within masculinity and, become the men that we want to become. Even if it's emotionally expressive, happy, bubbly, huggy, touchy men. And talked to my parents finally about all these things, and it was wonderful. We went on a retreat where we all came back together. In fact, this was just a week ago, and it was wonderful. And here I am today, and I'm going to keep working with kids, and I'm going to keep working towards peace. And I want to leave you all with just one last thing, and that's a question. What are you going to do to change yourselves? And I really mean that, because there's nothing magical about my experiences. I'm just a normal person who really had to push myself to get out of my comfort zones. So don't view this as something to step back and say, wow, that was great. View this as an opportunity to look at yourselves and ask, okay, what kind of person do I want to become? And am I that happiest, bubbliest, touchiest, huggiest person that I can be? Thank you.